Hello and welcome everyone to the session with Charles Cooper about intelligent content needs intelligent metadata. I'm happy to have Charles Cooper in the room again, and welcome everybody who's in the room already. So yeah, Charles, I stopped the sharing here, and you can start your screen sharing, and I hope the screen sharing works fine.
Okay, so thank you everyone. So Charles Cooper here, Vice President of the Rockley Group. I have spent about 30 plus years in the building things business. I first started off building electronic devices, both consumer and medical devices. And now I've really spent the last 25 years in the content building business. And so the rise of XML and DITA for me has just been an absolutely a wonderful thing, because we look at content as something that can be built the same as any other part of the product. I've spent a long time working in this, written a bunch of books, and part of what I really find it's important is to actually test the thing. So I have this large collection of devices that I get to test content on new devices, including things such as augmented and virtual reality. A lot of work that we're doing these days with companies who are doing service-type manuals, and they want to be able to display that as overlays on the real world. So augmented reality is an interesting thing to play with. I'm going to talk about intelligent content, metadata, some examples of challenges that we have seen with our clients over the years, and questions that they've asked of us, how we use DITA and metadata to support intelligent content, and some of the ways that we have suggested to our clients that they can get their processes up and running. So first, quickly, what is intelligent content? Well, it really is a back-end content strategy that allows us to focus the way that we create our content. When we think of the front-end strategy, when we're looking at stuff that goes onto the web, and there's so much about web content strategy these days, we're talking about customer personas and journeys and all of those great things that are very, very focused only on the web versus all of the ways that we may produce content. So we're looking at, on that back-end strategy, the metadata, the content assembly, structured writing guidelines, DITA itself, everything that's built into DITA. So we look at it as the stuff that lets the forward-facing content make sense for people. We're going to take a look at what we call the 5 characteristics of intelligent content. It's content that's designed to be modular, structured, reusable, format-free, and semantically rich. And if you think about it, a lot of this is what really goes into DITA. In terms of modular, it's designed to be broken out into topics or reusable components. And the reusability is key, because we want to be able to determine, we want to be able to use the same information across applicable but multiple places where it's required. We don't talk about building documents anymore, or posters, or manuals. What we talk about is we're assembling, as I said, 30 years in the assembly business, and we're assembling content. We assemble these content components into content products, which are quite often standard documents. That's how the user sees them, but we see them as assemblies of modular restructured information. We can remix it, we can repurpose it. If we're putting it out onto the web, we can reskin it so that it looks differently. Val, a few minutes ago, talked about having format-free content that you would put a different CSS or style sheet on. That's exactly what we're talking about. We want to be able to translate information. We don't necessarily translate it at the document level. We translate it at the topic level. A topic that is properly modular and componentized can be generally translated as a module. In the long run, you do have to do all the final review and translation and verification at the document level, but you can get things done earlier by translating at the module level. It is, by definition, structured. It needs to be both human and machine readable. When it's structured, it's predictable. It makes it easier for humans to read. It makes it easier for us to read, to scroll through the content, and we reduce our cognitive load as we're trying to understand new content, because the structure is the same. it helps when we're assembling it and building it, or if it's on the web, or we're using Watson or something else to understand it, to structure it, to find it. Computers can automatically process it as well, and that makes it significantly easier. The structure provides authoring guidance. It makes it easier for the writers to determine what they're doing, what they're saying. It's one step up. It's similar to Val's comment about whether it's a dog or a mutt or a hound. It's one step up, but conceptually the same. It helps ensure that people create content consistently. It makes it semantically organized. It makes it easier to understand, again, both for humans and for computers. And it makes it much easier for doing that translation or guiding that transcreation. It's where you look at that idiomatic information and say, structurally, this is an idiomatic thing, and in Spain, we would use this term, in Germany, we would use that term, or because we're working on a modular basis, we realize we don't actually need to, we have a problem here and we need to address it because in the target language, we can't think of anything that matches that. So because it's modular, we find that these problems early on in the phase. It's reusable. It helps us develop new content products. If we have a user guide that is 50 pages, we may have a quick reference guide for the same product. We may be able to use pieces out of that, out of the larger one directly, or from the smaller to the larger, sharing information. It makes it easier to create it, manage it, transit, all of those things. If we're using something, we can use it once and create it once and use it in many places. We have the ability to automatically produce content that if we change something, the next time it's produced, that we use the latest changed version. Now, we don't necessarily recommend that. It's better to have either some rules in there or a person, a process that says, do we want to use the latest version? But we have the ability to do that. We often talk about, text versus video versus images versus GIFs or whatnot. Text is definitely the easiest to reuse, but it is possible to create and save reusable content in just about any format. So it really is about reusability. It's creating it once, reusing it in many times, creating it and translate and reuse it in many places. It makes it much cheaper, much faster, and it's all about the structure. The format free is important, and that really comes down to the essence of DITA, where we strip out the formatting information. We have the formatting information has been taken out, and it allows us to determine, depending on the output device, by using a style sheet, what it will actually look at. It doesn't matter what output channel or what device it is. The look and feel is dependent on the output device rather than on built-in formatting within the content. Now, there are some exceptions to that. We do still tend to use things like underline and bold and emphasis, italic, but those really are things that there are rules out there to make those structured as well. I haven't actually seen them used in the way that people think of them as structure, although I expect that that will be adopted more and more in the future. Once again, it's all about the format-free separates the formatting, the look and feel from the way it actually works. And then the fact that it's semantically rich, this is really the hub of the issue. It really comes down to the fact that we want to describe what the content is, not what it looks like. So that format-free and semantically rich is like hand and glove. They're both very important. Now, if we don't tag information at all, if we're just using DITA and we're bringing it into a system and we don't have any tags, if we are using a semantically rich and well-formed set of information, we can actually the system can learn a lot about that, and it can determine that this is of a particular, this and that are related semantically. However, if we add metadata to it, then suddenly that semantic level of information gets added onto with things that we have explicitly said. This is the title. This is a base paragraph. This is extended information. this image is about this product, this image is about that product, or this product in a different country. So if we add the metadata to the structure, then it becomes incredibly rich and incredibly powerful. It helps us build those customized content products. So we can say, for this country, in this language. Now, in Canada, we have 2 official languages. So we have French and English. You can't simply say, we have a version for Canada, a version of this manual for that product for Canada. We have to say that we have the same one, we have it in English and we have it in French. We have to separate that because Canadians use different terms than Americans do. For example, we spell things differently. We use mostly the same phrases, but there are some differences. And likewise, if we were simply saying it's French, well, we have to add the extra information that is for Canada, because Canadian French is very different than French French. They are obviously related, but they are significantly different. And if you produce a manual or a document and you are planning on selling it in Canada, you really had better use French, Canadian French, rather than French French. So we need to be able to use that metadata to identify and produce those customized content products. So product language, name, description, and country. And that country and language thing is something that is often lost on our clients. They simply assume that if they say, well, we're moving into Portugal, so we will use Portuguese, and we'll use exactly the same information, the same language for Brazil. Not necessarily the same, so you have to think about that. You have to think about that. Unfortunately, there really is no easy button, and this is one of the challenges that our customers often have, is they work with things and they don't necessarily think everything through before they start actually trying to implement it. I think that's human nature more than anything else. So intelligent metadata, well, it's really part of a taxonomy. And what a taxonomy is, it's a way of organizing and structuring information to make it easy to find. We're trying to get away from the stuff drawer. We're trying to get away from, if you think about someone saving files on their computer, saving everything as a giant document in the documents folder within their user area. So we want to be able to find information. We want to be able to use it. We want to be able to reuse it. We want to be able to reduce. When we're searching for content within our systems, we want to be able to reduce the amount of searching that has to take place to speed up information retrieval and to improve the quality of information retrieval. Now, this is incredibly archaic, of course. I am of an age where I vaguely remember going into the library and finding these giant oak cases that had the library card catalog. But it works exactly the same as search online, or if you go into a library or you're using the online library tools to find information for a local resource. That card catalog contains the information about the books, about the videos, about the records that are in the library, but they don't contain the information in the library. The stuff that's on that card, the location of it in the library, when it was published, who published it, who the author was, whether it's a trade paperback or a hardbound, whether it's a book or an audio recording, all of that is the metadata that we're looking for. Another way of examining metadata is think about wine. Think of all the ways you can break wine down into things. So if you were to take a look at this tiny little fragment of a taxonomy, very, very basic taxonomy of, well, drink. We could have wine, beer, alcohol, non-alcoholic sodas and drinks. We need to take a look at that, and you can see that if we were to say we were looking for a wine, and we have the entire range of the planet for all of the wines that we could find, if we simply wanted to look for French wine, then you can see that there's a much smaller set of information that we have to search for. It becomes much easier to find that information. But that's still an awful lot of wine because France produces an awful lot of wine. So perhaps we were interested in the wine from the Alsace region in France. Well, as you can see, and trust me, it is actually there. It's a very tiny, like 6 pixels in green there. That cuts down the amount of different types of wine that you're looking for it would raise the quality of your search and would make your search much, much faster. So the stuff that we see down here in the bottom left, wine versus, say, we may have beer versus waters versus other things. The country, France, Canada, United States, Germany, the different regions, all of these things, the stuff below those top three categories, or facets as taxonomists call them, this is the metadata. And you think, well, that sounds simple, that's easy to deal with. What's the big deal? Well, part of the problem, as I said earlier, is we as humans tend not to develop our metadata intelligently. We tend to, as a Canadian humorist put it about 100 years ago, run madly off in all directions. And the reason, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at some of the challenges I've seen with when I've done it, when our clients have done it, when we've been brought in to solve problems, some of the things that have caused problems and how we can utilize that thought and thinking about those as a guide for more effective behavior to create intelligent metadata. So we don't plan properly. One of the challenges we often have, as I said, is we want to get started. We have a deadline. We're not really sure what our metadata should be. So in many cases, what happens is someone will either get a tool in or even before they've thought of a tool, they start thinking about who the product is for, what they're going to do with it, but they don't follow it all the way through. You have to plan ahead when you are implementing metadata, because if you don't, you'll find that it is skewed towards one group or doesn't meet the requirements of any group, or is so very superficial that at first glance you think that it meets everyone's needs, but it actually, in the worst of all possible cases, doesn't meet anyone's needs. So we have to really learn to think about it. We need to focus. These are standard questions that technical writers think about when they are writing content, but our experience is when they're going one step back, they're not thinking about it necessarily when they're writing structured content, or when they're thinking about the metadata that they need to use to actually make that structured content work properly. So the big question within who your customer is whether you are writing, whether you're creating metadata, you know who you're writing for, but whether you're creating metadata for your internal customers, those people who are writing information, writing topics, writing elements, writing components, and how are you trying to come up with metadata to tag the content, those topics, those elements, so that they can find them for reuse? Or are you creating metadata for the final customer, the end user, the person who's at the end of that printing process, or on the end of that mobile device, or that smartwatch, or the standard web? Are you trying to help them find that document that they're looking for to solve their problem? Now, if you're doing structured writing, you should be doing both. And quite often we find is that people are focusing so much because as writers, we are focused on the needs of our users. We forget to support our own needs, the needs of us, the writers, the content creators, to find those topics. So you really have to think about that. That is incredibly important and is one of the bigger problems that we've had or we've seen in the field. You have to think about how the content is being delivered. I referred to that just briefly a second ago when I talked about being delivered on the web versus the mobile web versus a particular device or print. All of these things are things we need to think about. So part of that comes back into the style sheet, what style sheet will be applied, but you have to think about how you're creating the content for those different devices. Do you have a captive device? Do you know that it's always, are you writing sort of built-in help, as it were, and you know exactly what it's for? And if you think you know exactly what it's for, are you sure? Don't think about it just for this build or this product. If the content you are writing is structured and well-formed and well-designed and might be used in the future somewhere else, don't write to a particular device unless you know that that is exactly what's going to happen and that content will never be reused anywhere else. So you have to think about all of these things. It's focusing, it's planning, it's understanding the purpose of the metadata. We tend to forget ourselves as content creators, as technical writers, when we are creating our metadata, because we've had so much in the field talking about finding information in the field, finding information, search engine optimization, et cetera, et cetera. We also need to support our own metadata. Quite often we find that people are looking at this and simply saying, well, we'll get the metadata and then it'll be fine. We'll never have to change it. That's not how it works. Metadata is a journey. Metadata is something that you should expect to change. Just think about it. You're writing for a set of products now, but in the future, you'll have new products. And you need to be able to enhance your metadata to take advantage of those new products or the different capabilities of those products, or a new audience, or a new country. So we need to be able simply to recognize as we're doing this that metadata is not a, to use an idiomatic phrase, one and done. You have to work on it on an ongoing basis, because that will ensure, A, that your first pass will probably not be quite what you want, but you want to be able to ensure that it meets your needs in the future. So if it doesn't work as well as you wanted the first time, that's fine. You will continue to modify and improve the metadata that you create. And another challenge we have, and it's sort of an outgrowth of that one and done philosophy, is we have to mind the gap. We have to remember that you never is a big word, but it's difficult to get everything perfect. And you should deal with the fact that not only do you want to ensure that you have a good quality metadata, that it meets your needs now and you can grow it in the future, but don't hold off until you think, well, we know we're going to do it in the future and improve it and update it, but we want to get it 100% perfect for our first release. And then we'll continue to improve it, or we will only update it as we need. No, don't make the good be the enemy, the perfect be the enemy of the good. Make sure that you know that you are going to improve it. It is a journey. Get it out there. It will start helping you, as will, creating structured content, having the metadata to support it. Even if it's not perfect during your first rollout, go with the flow. You can make it better, but don't try to get it perfect the first time off. Another problem that we have and that we see all the time with groups is that people in different departments don't necessarily talk together. What you should be doing is you should be working across groups. We help people form teams of people across different groups who are going to share information, or who perhaps should be sharing information. As technical writers, we often find that we can talk to the people, the subject matter experts, the researchers, the engineers, but downstream it can be difficult to talk to either the sales or the marketing or the visioning team within an organization. And sometimes those business silos can be very, very difficult to cross. But we have to remember that we need to create information. If we're trying to create information that's shared by these groups, our metadata must support that. So where are you getting it from? How is it being provided? Who is it being provided to? These are all things that you have to think about. And so often we find that it's not. And also these different business groups use different tools. Our customers don't care what department we're in. Our customers don't know that we have different tools within the organization. All of these tools fit a particular need, but sometimes we don't know that there's one group using FrameMaker and another group is using InDesign. They're both fantastic tools, and they talk to each other, but sometimes because we're different business groups, we don't think about it, and we don't even think to ask, how are we going to get the information from one group to the other, from one department to the other? We have to sit down. That's part of that planning, about thinking it through to ensure that we are sharing information conceptually from group to group, department to department, but that our tools actually can do that. Now, the metadata is really that glue. Sometimes I refer to it, it's the oil, the lubricant that makes everything work, or it's the glue that makes everything hold together. Whichever way you look at it, that's true, because the metadata can help us. Once we're sharing information, it can say that it doesn't matter where you've created it or how you've created it, but this information is related to that information with the following metadata. And that allows us to move forward as a company rather than as a group or a department struggling to produce information from one group to the other. We often don't take advantage of the tools that we have. If we're using XML, if we're using DITA, it has a lot of capability built right into it that sometimes, because we're so focused on simply writing, we forget about the metadata and how it can act as that glue between the different groups and the different tools. So for example, DITA provides a whole host of metadata elements. The ones that people think about most often, I've put down here things like audience. Who is this for? Who is the audience? What is the brand? If you're writing just for, the reason I have this is sometimes people say, well, we don't need brand. You can reassign how you use each of these. But if you're writing, we have people who are doing OEM type work, and they are creating content that is effectively the same, but is branded with different companies' information. So brand is useful for that. Prod name, the product name. Prod info, the product information. The platform, what platform does this run on? The version and revision list. Now, it's key, and everyone's probably aware, of course, that DITA was created by IBM initially for their own internal use, in particular for managing the software documentation. So if you look at the whole DITA standard, you will definitely see that there are things here that are really, really focused on software releases. But there are a couple of things there that allow you to go well beyond that software and platform focus. And I'll come back to that in a second. But so, for example, if we were looking at DITA at the audience tag, it's obviously the audience that the topic or the information is applicable to. It's not just a one-to-one relationship. Quite often people will forget this. When they're creating the topic, they say, well, I know who the audience is for this. And then we look at it and well, how many audiences actually use this? Well, we have 3 people who use it, or 3 audiences, but we only tag it because this is the most important one. Would it be useful? I'll ask. If you were able to find this information because it's usable for other audiences as well? Oh, yeah. Well, did you know that you can actually have you can have multiple audiences for the same topic? Oh, no, we didn't know that, or we didn't think about that, or we'd forgotten it. So there are things that you need to dig back into the DITA metadata when you're doing the implementation and thinking about it during the planning. Make sure that you're actually taking advantage of the things that the metadata can do. Now, of course, there's also a number of predefined audiences for the audience within this. User, purchaser, administrator, programmer. There are these things that are built in there, and you can certainly see programmer, executive, services. These are obviously very focused on the original design for DITA coming out of IBM. But we can change these. There's other. We have the other type attribute that allows us to change who that audience is. We don't have researcher as part of the predefined audience, but we can define our own. And that means you may not have any of these particular audiences relevant to you, or maybe some of them are, but you need other ones. And you can expand that without actually, it's not specializing, it's not doing any, it's just going in and utilizing the capabilities of DITA metadata to meet your needs without getting into customization and specialization and doing expensive things. You don't have to do expensive things. When you learn about the DITA structure, you can see that the metadata capability, there's an awful lot that can be done within it. Now, there are two elements that are incredibly powerful, other meta and other props. They can be used, as I showed you before, to create metadata that's not in the standard, stuff that meets your needs and the needs of your customers. So if you have something that you're trying to determine, if you have a particular type of product or data, there's something that you're trying to make sure that you can find within your system, within the topics, you can use these two to effectively specify anything. Other props define the properties of the content, obviously by the name. It's used for processing more than anything else. And other meta allows you to talk about any of the content. It's about the topic. It's about the content within it, as opposed to the properties of the content. And you can define that. It's not used for conditions. It's not used for processing. But between the two of these things, there's a tremendous amount of work that you can do. But as Stan Lee, the inventor of The Amazing Spider-Man, put it, with great power comes great responsibility. You can cause yourself all sorts of grief and problems by coming up with far too many different types of elements, things that either conflict, which is a problem some people will have. They'll specify one thing as yes for this and no for that, and you only really needed one of those rather than two. So you have to think about it on a consistent basis. And you can go to the point where you specify very, very deeply, but it's unusable by the content creators because there's too much metadata. You want to minimize the amount of metadata that they have to put in annually, but you have a lot of power within DITA, and you should use it. Now, content management systems such as Adobe Experience Manager, in particular with the XML add-on, can tremendously enhance the flexibility of the metadata. There's a lot that you can do within the topics and adding the metadata within DITA, but you can also add another layer of metadata by using the tool, by using the AEM or using any other CMS to do this, because DITA is good, but AEM, for example, has a lot more metadata capabilities than basic DITA does. So don't be afraid to do that. Look at it. Where is the best place to save the metadata, to store the metadata, to leverage it across different properties, across different groups? What is the ability of the people who are creating the content to tag the information? Are the people creating the content going to be tagging it? Is it going to be someone else? How is that done? What is the governance? Adobe Experience Manager gives you a tremendous capability to centralize all of that information and make it much easier to use. Our goal is to get away from this type of situation into something like this, where people are working together, talking together. They may not work together on a daily, intimate basis, but when they need to share information, the metadata that we've set up needs to meet all of their needs. Now, it should be corporate-wide, ideally, but if you're not doing a corporate-wide implementation, make sure that whatever the metadata has been set up to do, it meets whatever your plans are, both in the short, medium, and of course the long term. You don't want to define metadata that doesn't allow you to grow. You don't want to set up a process that doesn't allow you to grow. But if you've only looked at it and said, we have 3 groups, there are 20 groups who could share this information, but we are going to focus on these 3 groups with a rollout to 5 others, and we know that there are some who will never use it, don't struggle to get everyone in corporate-wide if you know it'll never happen. Focus on your immediate needs. Make sure you don't block out the downstream needs, but also make it available to other people who you may not expect, who will want your insight, who will want to use the content. Quite often we find that after systems have been up and running for a year or 2 and they've stabilized and people are utilizing them and they are seeing the advantages of having good, solid metadata attached to good, solid, structured, intelligent content, they get groups coming to them and saying, we weren't interested 2 years ago when you first started talking about that, but we do see that now that could be useful to us. How do we get on board? So you want to be able to put in structures that allow you to do that in the future. So how do you actually do that? How do you do this? How do you think about it? How do you actually work? How do you start? So the first thing is is you need to gather people, the people who are going to use the system. Now, ideally, you want to be able to include everyone from the authors to the users, whoever those users are, whoever those customers, those clients are. Think about that internal versus that external, as I said. You don't necessarily need them in the room initially at the same time, but you want to get them on the team so that you can start to build metadata that meets the needs of both the published, the people who are utilizing the published information, however it's published, and the people who are creating the information that gets to that. Make sure you don't forget those two people. Identify the scope. I said earlier, whether or not something is based on the whole corporation or a set of groups or a division. Make sure you identify how that is going to be done and the reason behind it. If you're doing it really, really large, then it can be hard to start. It can be a bit like feeling like trying to boil the ocean. We generally recommend that people work with the people who see the advantages and will work together. A smaller group of people, it's easier to share. You're probably already talking the same language, as it were, and then move it out later on. So identify that scope, what it is. When you're dealing with that, particularly within that group, but maybe even outside the group, look to see what metadata, what taxonomies, what information already exists. There's all sorts of places that you can find this information. Spreadsheets, talking with people, subject matter engineers. If it's customer-facing information you're focused on, then looking at websites, see how the websites are organized. Taxonomy is not the same as navigation on a website or in a book or in a manual, but they are related and they can give you a hint at how people are thinking about things and how they're already breaking it down, i.e. what categories they have and what metadata are within those categories by looking at what's out there already. It's going to be incomplete. It may not meet your needs, but it's a great place to start. There is no point in inventing the wheel. Think about how your writers are currently writing. So on the content management side, this is that internal. What are they writing? How are they writing? How are they organizing it? Do they have a CMS? Do they have need for a CMS? Find out what the business process is, how they do all of this. Are they using terms in a consistent manner? Are there tools like acrolinks that help them? Or do they have a whiteboard with, you should call it a dog and not a mutt on the whiteboard? How is that done? Are there synonyms being used? Do you have a company, we've worked with someone who does multiple products across multiple countries, and in one country it's called this, in another country it's called that, but the service people don't care where it's coming from. So they need to be able to link this name with that name, but it's really this thing over here, and they have synonyms to link it. Do they do that? Should you be doing that? If not, why? Think about it through. Think it through. If you're looking at the content management side, the structured side, once again, how do you intend to retrieve the content? Are you using fully structured stuff? Are you moving towards DITA? Are you in DITA? How do you need to find the information in order to build those information products? So think that through. It's about the planning. And the end users, look at who are they? Where are they? What are they using? What content? How are they finding the information? Is it on the web? Do you have a search engine that's specifically to your customers? Do they have a portal? If it's a portal, then you have extra capabilities to provide links from the information. You can sort of roll up, and it's not, sometimes it can be manual, sometimes you may want it automatic, where you roll up metadata that was on a DITA map, sort of the table of contents for a DITA product, up to the final product that's searched for by the customers. If you're going to do that, make sure that it's useful all the way from the content creators all the way up to the customers at the other end. If not, how are you going to deal with that? And make sure you have a plan, whether it be a process or a transform or something in place to do what you want, but don't just run madly off in all directions. Think about what you need. Consider your customers the tasks. What are they doing when they're trying to retrieve the content? Are they repairing something? Are they installing something? Are they learning about something? Are they playing a game? What are they doing? Put yourself, again, this is standard stuff in terms of technical writers, but think about how it works back to the metadata. It's not just the content, it's the metadata that you need to make the content work. Who are your users? How many categories, different groups of users? Do you use personas to write for it? Do you have different metadata that reflects each of those personas? What content are they using at any given time? If you've got different user groups, do they need the same content? Do they need totally different content? How does that content differ? Do you have something for experts versus something for newbies? Do you use progressive releases and reveals on content as they are drilling down through it? Your metadata, if that's what you want to do, your metadata must support that, and you must think it through to make sure that it works. If you're looking at different levels of detail, in my early one, in my slide there where I was talking about the other metadata and the audience, we have an expert audience versus a beginner audience. Do you want to show them different types of information? If they do, then you need to be able to support that and think about that within the metadata. These are the sort of questions that we ask people to think about as they are doing that initial scoping, why they want to do something. What is the level of knowledge in your company as a whole? Do people think about this? Is metadata something that people deeply understand? Or do they simply think of it as, well, a hashtag is kind of like a metadata? And yes, it is, but the hashtag is the inverse of metadata. When you add extra hashtags, you get more and more information. As you search with more and more metadata terms, you get less and less but higher quality information. So when you think about taxonomy and metadata in your organization, the people you'll be working with, what do they think about? How much do they know? What are the most important priorities for the company? What do they want about? What do they want to do? There's all sorts of things like this. Are you dealing with content that's internal, that's external? Is there a lot of content? Is there a lot of content that's very, very shallow in the sense that there's not a lot of information in it, but there's an awful lot of it? Do you have very few pieces of content, but they're very, very deep? Or do you have something in between? Who is creating it? Who is supporting them? Do you have subject matter experts who are different from the writers? We work with some companies where these subject matter experts are the writers. And that's a very different thing you have to think about in terms of the metadata that you're applying, because you need to think about that due to the quality of the metadata that you'll be getting from subject matter experts versus writers, and the quality of the writing you may be getting from the subject matter experts versus the writers. Sometimes subject matter experts are not the best writers, but they understand it and they understand the need very, very well. So you have to balance that within your organization. And if you have different groups of people, are they going to spend an awful lot of time arguing over things if you don't plan it up ahead? If you do have that sort of thing, and you're going to need to do it anyway, you're going to need to set up some kind of a taxonomy or a metadata governance group, people who can manage the ongoing changes, answer questions, and determine what happens when, or if two groups or two people are arguing over how something should be tagged, someone has to be able to come in and solve it, not for just that instance, because that's easy. It solves that question and understand the ramifications of where that metadata or taxonomy changed. What will it do to the rest of the system? You have anything out there already? Can you bring it in? Do you have a database of taxonomy? Is somewhere in your organization, do they already have a taxonomy? Do they have metadata that you can use? What types of training will you need to do for people? All of these are important things that you need to ask and more importantly, to be able to answer in order to create good, intelligent metadata. So intelligent content provides the guidance. The intelligent metadata, however, is required to implement intelligent, structured content. It doesn't just happen. This is the biggest problem we see with people is they figure it's easy, we understand structure, but they don't understand the stuff necessary always to make the structure sing, to make the content sing when it's in the structure that they have. You have to think it through. You have to work at it. That planning is absolutely key. It has to be part of your business culture. It has to be part of what happens on a day-to-day basis. When you're planning new products, when you're creating new content, it can't be an add-on. Oh, we'll create the content, then we'll think about adding metadata to make it easier to find, either for us as writers or for our users in the field. You have to make it just part of the regular information that you're doing when you're creating the content. It takes time and forethought, but the rewards are absolutely tremendous. You do have to plan, but the rewards really, really are great. That's really the end of it. I did want to mention, as I said earlier, we do a lot of work with augmented reality, and if you'd like to be interested, if you're involved in technical communications and how that might, augmented reality might help you, there's an Oasis group that are doing some work on that, and we're working with Adobe to make sure that their products work well with augmented reality. And if you're interested in being a part of that, please feel free to join us.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, but in 7 minutes we will start with the next presentation. So maybe a quick one that I catched here. How does one handle different tones and styles across silos, white papers versus tech talks, with learning systems, with marketing, social, and so on?
Yeah, that's one of those great, this is where metadata is brilliant, because what you can do within the CMS is you can say that with this audience, it's best if you can have the same tone, but you cannot always do that. So what you can do is, if you have content that is written that is a particularly technical thing that you must have, if this content is updated here, it must be updated there, you can have 2 different versions, sort of sister versions. One is written for a technical audience, one is written for customers, and it comes from marketing, but they're tied together so that you know the author who has created it, if the information is used and reused somewhere else with a different voice, that if I update A, they can be flagged and be told that, oh, A and B are tied together. You need to look at B to make sure that you don't have to make changes to it, or you need to get in touch with the owner of B and make sure that the technical changes are made in that as well. So it's best to have a consistent voice. If not, then it's possible to, it's definitely possible to have those tied together.